Welcome everyone to the third and final poetry reading of our spring poetry reading series at the University of La Verne. Thank you for coming. It's the end of poetry month. T.S. Eliot called it the cruelest month. I call it the coolest month, at least this month, even though it's like 95 degrees outside. I'm Sean Bernard, the director of the creative writing program at the University of La Verne. And it's I love doing this. I say this every time, but this year one of the few benefits I think of this awful pandemic has been being able to cross space and time and to bring back students, program alums who might be, say, in Mississippi right now, to read with us on campus and pair them with current students. And the series we had fiction in the fall and winter, and this is, as I said, the third of the poetry series. It's been fantastic. I think creative writing at the University of La Verne really feels like a family to me, and it's a family that you never get to get out of, right, Gabby? So you're stuck with us forever, and we're stuck with you happily, just like family. All right. Today we have two fantastic poets, Gabriela Ramos, who graduated a couple years ago, and I'm blanking, Masa Shah, sorry, Masa, and Masa Shah, and I'm going to turn it over to them momentarily, just to give you a general context. Each poet will read for 10 to 20 minutes or so. They'll introduce one another. After they've both read, we'll have a Q&A that's open to everyone. I will ask everybody to mute themselves during the reading, and you can express your joy through the chat or through emojis or reactions. You know how to do all this stuff. I don't need to say anything else. All right, well, without further ado, one of you is going to take over. Go for it.
I will be introducing Gabriela Ramos. Ramos graduated from ULV with a BA in creative writing and a minor in sociology in 2019. Currently, they're in their first year with Teach for America in Jackson, Mississippi, teaching 8th grade ELA. In the midst of teenage drama and endless meetings, they continue to foster their love for poetry and creative nonfiction. They hope to someday publish a collection of poems and essays inspired by lemons, forgiveness, and potholes.
So, hello, everybody. In case anybody was wondering, since most of y'all were teachers for me, yes, I am still procrastinating everything. So, I'm going to read two poems, both of them which I finished today in classic Gabby Ramos style. Okay, so I'm just going to get right to it before I embarrass myself further. This first poem is titled Evergreen. Let's see. Loneliness makes us malleable to becoming, glass creeping in the sun until time absconds, portrait still, drawn and gone, nestled in the scent of bergamot and cedarwood, buried in the silent swell beneath the ivy, uproot shivers and slivers of grass, to unfurling, when all there is a patient warmth, a smiling skull in the blackberry thicket, the metallic sweetness of ever-blossoming inked flowers bleeding on the wind. Let it settle softly in the mouth, wither and wilt, wane and swallow, to detangling, matted thoughts from the carcass until they seep and swarm over fingers like infernal ants. One becomes none, rot turns to spring. There is nothing the viridian veins of the earth cannot claim. Nothing remains, no names but hunger. Loneliness makes us malleable to unraveling. That was poem number one. Yay. I forgot about the snaps. Okay. This second poem is untitled because I suck at titles. Earplugs do little to help against the tremendous crashing noise, the clanging, the shattering of glass. I can do this. Focus. Run the tests, check for defects, call the heat end, call the auditor, clear any backups, beware of shards. There's glass in my boot, rubbing against the tongue. Run, check, call, clear, beware, break. The alternate offers me a banana, I tell them of the banana licuados she made with too much sugar. I tell them of when I last saw her, just a photo, of how she'd stopped dyeing the grays away, of how instead she started, no. Run tests, check defects, call mechanic, call heat in. No, she'd finished dyeing. Clear backup, beware of shards, run, check, call. Leader wants to talk, but it's the look on their face and the tilt of their head. I hear the glass bottles spill over and crash. Clear the backup, beware of shards, sweep, sweep, sweep the way she taught me. Run tests, check defects, their plane should have landed by now. Call heat end, call auditor, clear the backup, break. They always say I'm their grandchild's age. They always ask, what are you doing here? What am I doing here? I respond in the Spanish my abuelita taught me that I only really used with her. I changed my sweat-soaked hairnet and slicked my hair back into a tight ponytail, the way she always did it for me before school. I listened to the chisme, the rumor of layoffs. I can't eat. Run tests, check defects. I can handle this. Call mechanic, call auditor, cover the next line, lift with your legs, or I'll be wearing the same menthol patches that she would ask me to put on her back. Run, check, call, cover. I can handle this. Clear the backup, focus, clear, 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 clear. I can't afford grief. And that's it for me. Okay. Yay. Thank you, everybody. So next up is Masa Shah. Masa is a junior psychology major and a creative writing minor. She enjoys philosophy and losing at chess. She aims to get her PhD in clinical psychology after she graduates from Laverne. Yay. So warm welcome to Masa. Thank you.
Hello, I'll be reading a few of my poems that I've written in the past year. The first poem I'd like to read is titled A Tragic Body. And in this poem, I explored the concept of a creator, maybe God, in a radically new perspective, instead of seeing him as some sort of supreme, authoritative. I imagine God as vulnerable and fragile. A tragic body. A palm curls into another palm with sagging wrist. God, an infant, trembles inside a cold chest. Ribs cradle God's fragile flesh. Lungs expand and shrink, a soft breath that lullabies the baby to sleep. A shiver and a sway, and then an intense inhale, a tight hold, like a grasping a wish, a cancer that grows from the ache of what if, a grieving body's, a virgin of suicide's last breath. My next poem that I'd like to read is called My Abloom Angel. And in this poem, I retell an Islamic narrative of the Prophet Muhammad and the story of him going to this cave and receiving the first verses of the Quran. And I retell this story in a very strange, eerie, uncanny way, and I tell a narrative of transformation. My abloom angel opens up her ribs, and I, an astray nomad, crawl inside. Her warm skin swaddles me tightly. Her heartbeat sends pulses around my abandoned body. She cradles me with her inhales and exhales. Her bones grip me and release me. As her wings spread, I hear croaks of 2 ravens inside my belly. The ravens pluck my muscles for supper and use my hair to make a nest for their chicks. She begs, read, and her voice booms and echoes throughout her marbled body. My angel veins curl into Arabic letters. I cry, I am illiterate. Read, she demands. Feathers cluster in my throat as ravens push themselves up. I feel their claws clench and pull. Read in the name of your Lord, who has created you from broken wings and the ashes of a widow's wails. My angel's body tightens around me. I open up my mouth to cough. The ravens recite from within me, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, mimicking our beloved Arabian prophet, each letter sung in a divine passion. My eyes widen with ecstasy, and my own black wings spread. My next poem I like to read is called A Wooden Form. And in this body, I write about a body that is reduced to an object and how the world interacts with that reduced object body. A wooden form, stiff and rigid, my frame is pushed and pulled, my heart a golden knob, twisted and stained by men with large calloused hands, their gloves covered with black oil. I am between the in and the out, slammed shut and then rattled by men who grasp my heart. The lock, my tongue that seals me to the wall. The men drilled a hole in me so they could see what's behind. My body only remembered to keep those outside me outside. The next poem, called The Creative Us, is similar to my first poem. I kind of continue this exploration of what God may be in a new light. The creator of us is but an orphan, hungry for nourishment. It cries out, Mama. The vacant dimensions of the universe deliver its message to us, Mama. But we are but matter clustered into flesh, the hunger within the cry, a familiar urge. So we reply in a tender gesture, our love. The next poem I'll read is a very short poem, and it's a little bit of a sad poem, but I was contemplating like what it would be like for a suicidal person to see their own suicide, like what it may look like in their eyes. The blood mixes with the oil of the engine. The hums of an incoming train whispers, strength comes in many forms. And my body truly believes this as it sheds into flowering feathers that chase after the moon. My next poem I'll read, I compare like love to these seemingly unimportant objects and like how these objects may hold some sort of story to them. We are the lovers of the windmill, our blades made of broken bird wings, the gentle spin, the saged wind. We are the lovers of unsent mail, the quiet confessions of the tear-stained trash and the buried. We are the lovers of the broken door lock, the chairs that blocked the flinch of muscles and the unexpected, unwanted guest. We are the lovers of the rotten apple, fallen and unpicked, tunneled by ants and its journey into the dirt. So my next poem is called The Symposium of Limbs. And in this poem, I explored the Greek story that like before Zeus zapped people in half, people were like, they had 4 limbs and 4 legs and 4 arms, like they were combined into one. And I explore that concept and like what it means to someone who feels already complete by themselves. Soulmates are said to be made between the melody of the sun's rays and the tangling vines protruding from the soil. A humanoid of 4 legs and 4 arms with 2 halves of 1 face. Zeus was afraid of earth and sun, so he cleaved them and sent them to bleed. A hungry man searching for his hungry woman. I say, no woman nor man can outcast my cratered skin. I crumbled what once was and what will become. No other half can match my lapping tongue, my mirage of fingertips, the tips of my lips, the dipping of my voice, and the oneness of my form. And the last poem I'd like to read is very personal. I wrote it recently, and it explores the concept of like what happens to life after death, and also like the eternal reoccurrence by the philosopher Nietzsche. Like what if life never like ends? It's just a constant repetition, and you never really get to decide another fate. You never get to repeat anything like in terms of decisions. They just happen again and again with no recollection of that you lived it before. Every mistake I've made before. I am addicted to the taste of repetition, the never-ending circle. It warms me, it keeps me safe. I never want to let go of my suffering. I never want to wish for a better day. Like the lungs' infinite journey for breath, I want to breathe in the same air, the same molecules, the same scent. Like a child is born, grows, and dies. Like the body awakens, weakens, crumbles, and sleeps. Like the day and night. Like the trees change leaves. Like the decay and birth. Dualism has morphed into monism. There is nothing more. You've seen it all. And if this doesn't make you cry in joy, nothing will. Thank you for listening.
You guys are amazing. I wish I could hand you both microphones so you could just drop them. That was fantastic. Thank you, Gabby. Thank you, Masa. Short, sweet, and powerful, both of you. So I'll stop talking momentarily. But yeah, as I said before, it's great to open this up to a Q&A. I like to start the Q&As with the poets getting a chance to ask one another a question first, so they can have kind of a conversation that we get to eavesdrop on. And then everyone else is welcome to ask questions in the chat or audibly, however you prefer. So if Gabby, if you have a question for Masa or likewise, take it away.
I have a question for Gabby. In your poems, I noticed a lot of interesting imagery, lots of tangible imagery, like new concepts that you wouldn't see in the real world, like just created from your mind. But also they're intermixed with these complex emotions and these narratives. For instance, one line that I really love that I wrote down, bleeding of the wind. Like, what does that look like? What does that really, how would you describe that, like actually seeing that? So I wondered, like, what was your technique and how did you come up with those ideas?
For that, okay, that line specifically, I had another word besides bleeding that came out. I was like, why don't I just switch up that word? And it just threw it in there with almost no thought. But for these 2 poems, I basically, I was really inspired by 2 poets, Pablo Neruda and Tracy K. Smith. So that I was heavily inspired by them. And Angela may know because Tracy K. Smith with the Duende and everything. I told you I was thinking of them. With the bleeding on the wind, that line, that image kind of came almost literally because I have flowers tattooed on my arm. And I was like, okay, if like a body is decaying, you know, these flowers would kind of technically bleed on the wind. I don't know. I was messing with images. I was like, maybe it'll make sense. But I was making sure that the emotion would make sense rather than the image be literal, if that makes sense. Yeah. It makes sense to my head. It probably not to anybody else. Yeah, and then and right back at you, might as well. I think it was the poem that you said specifically that you were retelling one of the religious stories. It was a line that I also wrote down. I think it was like the very first one, like my abloom angel opens her ribs or something like that. I like scribbled it. I loved that imagery. I loved your imagery. And I kind of found it weird that we kind of used the same, not the same imagery, but we kind of touched on similar topics. So my question for you is, what made you choose religion for some of your poems? Why did that hit specifically for you? Since I see that you are a psychology and philosophy, I was like, why religion?
That's a good question. I guess I need to psychoanalyze myself to figure that out. But I guess because my concept of religion growing up was very much dogmatic, traditional, punishment, and eternal suffering for sins, and then there was the eternal bliss of heaven. But it didn't. As I got older, it started to like mess with me a lot and bother me a lot. So I just was trying to comfort myself by looking at religion in a new perspective that could be healthy for me.
Thanks, Masa. Thanks, Gabby. And as I said before, I mean, everybody now is, you're welcome to ask questions of either or both poets. And you guys did a tremendous job. I mean, I've been excited about the two of you reading together since we started putting the series together in March. I mean, such a good pairing. I mean, the two of you are such a perfect pairing. I really love your concerns and your styles and your craft. It's great. So yeah, people are welcome to ask questions. I do want to just pause momentarily and say, so Angela Thompson-Brenchley is here with us, and Angela is our poetry instructor, right? I mean, she's part-time faculty who gives 100,000%, I think. Angela, is that about how much passion you bring? I mean, she's done so much to help, I don't know, all the students and certainly and Masa and Gabby. So I just wanted to thank Angela, since poetry's Angela's jam. So, but yeah, questions, go for it, everybody.
I wanted to ask Masa, because all the poems that she read deal with religion in a sense, or at least with God and the afterlife and that sort of thing. And the other big theme seems to be the body, and I'm wondering, is this a phase that you're in, or is that where most of your inspiration comes from, one of those two areas?
It might be a phase. Every time I write, I keep seeing bodies and I can't help it. And every time I read a poem, like I always am connected to those imageries. And I don't know, I feel like right now I'm in a transitional stage of my life. So I'm very like contemplating like spirituality with also the like myself, the actual body that I'm in. So it might be a phase. I think that my poetry will be more expansive, or it will like change as I grow and other things become, you know, the way I see the world will always change. So it probably will change in the future.
So Gabby, how did your voice as a poet and a writer grow as a result of being at the University of Laverne? I think Masa hit on whether she's in a stage or not, that's really reflective of her voice and growth. So if you reflected, how did your voice grow by virtue of having an experience at Laverne?
I think how it grew is I definitely became more critical about it. Before, I always hated workshopping and editing my writing and revising, because I'm like, as soon as I write it down, I just want to forget about it. Now it's like I literally filled up this legal pad with one poem of drafts, which was different for me because because I was usually like, I'm a one and done type of gal. Yeah, I think to be more critical, but also just be more open to different inspiration, because I feel like now I can find inspiration literally anywhere and not just in poetry. Especially in my first poem, that line, I already forgot. Loneliness makes us malleable. That came from a video essay on Midsommar, the horror movie that came out a year or so back. So yeah, now it's to be critical and just be more open to anything. Yeah, I think that's how I grew so far.
Actually, I was wondering, since I think you spent most of your life in Southern California, but now you're in a very, very different place in Mississippi. And I'm wondering whether, of course, I have no idea how long you've been there, but I'm wondering whether that had an impact on your voice.
I think, no, not so much my voice, but probably in how I express it. The first poem, Evergreen, is because there's so much green out here. There's just green everywhere, which sounds kind of stupid to say, but like there's just trees everywhere, grass everywhere. Like it kind of amazed me. And the fact that I'm kind of alone here on top of COVID, on top of everything else, that really inspired that first poem.
And there's a couple of questions in the chat. So Angela asked one. If both of you want to, you can take turns getting that one, and then Viva asked one. So go if you want to address those.
As for the speaker, if I write with a speaker who's not at all connected with my personality, I think I have a few times, and in those poems, I actually don't really have a speaker with a personality. It's just more of like observing the world. I definitely think it's hard to not write with your personality, because I usually feel very personal about my poems, so sometimes it's hard to not have my voice be somewhat present in them. But when I'm taking a step back and I write more of the like observing the world and just thinking of like philosophically, I can get away from my personality a bit and focus more on the ideas and images.
I would say on my end, I've tried, but I feel like right now my poetry is just so personal that even if I try to separate it just ends up coming back to like me, myself, and I, because that's just how it goes. But I am trying. And then the second one, hi Genevieve, first time talking.
Hi, I was gonna maybe ask my question with my voice, if that's okay, because now that you've been talking some more, I have more cool things to say. So anyway, hi. Thanks for both of your readings. They were so much fun. So good. So I was just wondering, I mean, I guess this is specifically for Gabby, but I think Masa, maybe you have some ideas too. Just wondering if you have some suggestions for other students or people who are not in school, like how do you keep up with your poetry writing or find resources to like build community with poetry? Like, do you share it with your friends? What do you do when you're not in a workshop class, or once you've graduated, how do you kind of stay connected? So I was wondering if Gabby, you could give us some tips or ideas, or just tell us what you have done, or Masa, if you have ideas about what you do, like when you're not in a poetry class, how do you keep yourself engaged in writing? Thanks.
So actually for like 2019, I was actually very disconnected. Not intentionally, I was just very, very busy with work and everything. And then quarantine happened and COVID. And like, honestly, I felt so disconnected that I was like, I need to be able to connect not only with other people, but with myself. So then I turned to poetry, and then I was teaching, and I was like, okay, kids, we're doing poetry in class today, because this is the only time I can read or write poetry. So kids, we're doing poetry. And they hated it. So Angela, I understand your struggle now. I made them like it, sort of. Heavy on the sort of. But yeah, I bought poetry books, and I challenged myself to read them in class during lunch, or when kids were taking a test, like, okay, you're gonna read another chapter. I'm working through this massive collection of Pablo Neruda right now. And I just forced myself kids are doing district testing right now, and I'm just sitting in the corner with my book, annotating and making notes. One of these poems was written in completely annotations. Also, Instagram has been a great help finding writing tips and little communities and like book clubs on there, because you can do that like in the bathroom and waiting for an Uber. Like I just, in all the little pockets of time I have, that's when I try to shove in as much poetry and writing as I can, which helps for me because I work well underneath pressure. So
Yeah, and to add to that, if you're a student at University of Laverne and you feel like you can't write poetry, definitely take Angela's class because she's like amazing at teaching poetry. But in general, I think that when you leave university, it's nice to find a writing community. Like, I think a lot of places do have events and somewhat you can network with people because nobody gives a better feedback than other writers because they understand the process. But yeah, I would suggest trying to find a group that really helps.
Where I could ask it. I'm sorry. Yeah. I really enjoyed the poetry and heard you talking about the images and the emotions as being central to, I think, both of the poets. And I could see that. And I was just wondering, just curious, do you also think about how the poem will sound when you're writing it? Is that a part of it, or is that really not so much a part of it? And just wondering about your process and what you prioritize and how you think of the sound of the poetry as well.
Yeah, for me, I definitely focus a lot on sound work because I do like reading my poems out loud, and I hope that if people read my poems, they also like find some sort of rhythm with it because I find that to be enjoyable. Like not only just the words, but how the sound affects the tone. And I also work a lot on form, how it looks like, and how the words, like when you have them on a page, how that kind of forces readers to read it in a certain way so that they hit those rhythm. So yeah, there's a lot more than just the images to think of, but it depends on the poem as well, because some poems I focus more on sound than others, so it depends.
for me, I think the images come first, and I might have like some phrases that pop into my head. I'm like, okay, let's make this work. And then when I practice it out loud, then I'm like, okay, that sounds completely wrong. Let's shift it somewhere else for a smoother rhythm. Or this word might have a more interesting sound, like the word bleeding, as I mentioned earlier. So that typically comes in once I have like a clear, rough draft where I can move things around. That's when I really do focus on rhythm and tone and all of that good stuff.
That's amazing. You just wrote that. That's so great. I mean, like that you just wrote that. Like, how long did it take to write those poems that you read today?
Yeah, that first poem took me like a week and a half because I don't know what phrase it was. It was just stuck in my head. And like, okay, let's just keep making this work. Let's force it. I was going to abandon it like 10,000 different times. And then I just kept writing. And then eventually I just wrote down every single line I had in my mind, printed it out because free printing, and I chopped it up. And I was just moving the actual words around because it was taking too long writing it in 10,000 different iterations. And then the second poem, that one took me less than like a couple of hours because the students were testing, I was reading, and it was just one poem that hit me in Tracy K's Life on Mars that I just wrote it completely on one of her chapter title pages. And I was like, okay, now let's write it nicely so I can read it for today. So very different processes there.
I like how you both have shared this idea that the artistic process, right, is beyond just the words, because you're thinking of imagery, you're kind of playing like a painter as you're moving words around. And I think that's the fun in the creative process, right? The other thing, Gabby, I like to see is that you're using a pad. So Toni Morrison in interview said once she does pen to paper because the tactile ability to kind of feel the flow of thought is very important. And so process becomes really important. And so Gabby's talked a little bit about her process. Masa, are there pieces of your process you think have slowly evolved as you've gotten more internally reflective about your process?
Yeah, my process is usually write without reading what I wrote. So I just write and look away, and then I come back to it because there's a lot of judgment when you write down and you keep reading it. Um, so that's what I found works best is I work in short bursts and then I come back and I add more. And I try to like when I feel stuck, I just try to um just relax a bit and then also look at other art because you know when you see someone else's creativity it kind of bounces off of you, gives you inspiration. So that's my main process that I found works best.
I just want to say, I like how your process is like to relax and like take time away. My process is just to obsess over it until it's right.
Gabby, I have a similar process. So everybody though finds their own rhythm, right, Masa?
We certainly have time for a couple more questions, nudging certain students, but whatever.
I guess I have a question. You two both have mentioned sound work and how like sound work is like important in your poetry. And I was curious, like, how do you do that? How do you go about that? Like, do you find a word and do you just try to rhyme it, or like I don't know. Like, how do you go about making sound work and putting it into your work?
That's difficult to some extent because I kind of at first it took a lot of work from me to figure out sound work. I had to like look at the dictionary literally because I would forget words, so I just flip through it or look at the theory. But then it comes more naturally after you practice it for a while, and like when you think of a word, you kind of are used to looking at words with sound, so it comes more naturally. And then I also edit it, so I think about those words differently.
Definitely second with a dictionary. Also thesaurus.com. If you're like, oh, here's a basic word, I'm like, let's look at one that's somewhat related to it. Hence malleable and then unfurling. I'm like, there's a connection loosely. It's one. Also, I just try to make it sound as weird as I can. In some places, it probably doesn't make sense, but within the whole context of the poem, I'm like, huh, that worked. So again, like with the nature poem, I was like, okay, words involving nature. Let's just go randomly, just word vomit and pick and choose, and it works.
And then Hannah asked a couple questions, and I think we would have time after the poets get a chance to answer Hannah's questions. Thank you, Hannah and Emma. If you guys get it, we could have time for one more question. And then looking ahead, I am going to ask, don't tell the recording, but Masa and Gabby and Angela, if you guys want to stick around for a couple of minutes after we're done recording, I'd appreciate it. But yeah, if either of you wants to take on Hannah's questions, that'd be great.
Well, I usually write at night because that's when my family bothers me the least, and the dogs aren't barking. And I mean, for poetry, I'm always excited to write. In my other classes, it takes like energy, so I do that first, and then I do the fun stuff. And as for form and structure, recently I don't write with capitalized words. All my words are uncapitalized, so I kind of got inspired by bell hooks, so took her perspective on words and stuff like that. But I've always been doing that, and it's something that I've never kind of let go of. So I guess I'm still, so I guess I never really changed structure that much.
You mentioned bell hooks, and I'm like, that's another connection, because I read that for Xandra's class, all about love. Oh my God. Okay, sorry, I just had to mention that.
I'll just add an observation. So I was in a workshop recently with Nikki Giovanni, and it's my second time I met her before in person. And so she made this comment that poets are always critically looking. They're just looking. and they only share their opinions of what they see. And so when you started off earlier, you said it taught you how to be a bit more critical. Masa, you've talked about how it's getting you to think about and reflect on your own voice, how you situate with kind of religion and what you're thinking about, right? And so I just wanted to point out that it's building your ability to be critical. So Emma, when you ask, where do you get words? You're probably getting them as you're listening to things. You see something or hear something on the TV. I'll hear an alliteration of some kind and I'll just jot it down. So it's the critical lens and the creative lens kind of coming together to merge your voice. And that is what is so awesome about poetry.
Actually, I wanted to ask you a question, Sean, if I can. So you've now done 6 of these, 3 of them fiction and 3 of them poetry. I was curious to know, you mentioned that Gabby and Masa were perfect for this one. You must have had something in mind. How did you go about choosing the people that you chose, and how did you go about putting them together?
Well, I asked the very best writers that I knew, and they just happened to be, students and alums of the University of Verne Creative Writing program. So that was the first step, and it was very easy. I think, certainly with the poets, and I think with the fiction writers too, in consultation with Angela, and we tried to, always, whenever we've done readings, even before this year, students that we know, we've read a fair amount of their work, students who are great representatives, not only of the program, but of poetry, of fiction. And then this year with the pandemic and bringing in graduates for the first time, I just put a call out to grads. I have a list where I email them probably a little bit too often. I don't know, Gabby, maybe it's, maybe a little too much, but just asking anybody who's willing and able to volunteer and take part of it is usually the easiest way to go. And it was the same thing for the fiction in the fall and winter. So yeah, it's kind of a conversation with Angela, with the students, but it's pretty easy to find people, and it's really easy to find fantastic writers because there's so many of them, right? And you guys have done a great job all year long. But thank you for asking that question, Al. Yeah. And that's a great segue, I think. So we do have, and I mentioned this in the chat, one more creative writing event this spring, and that's going to be Thursday, May 20th, if my calendar is correct in my brain. I think that's the date. We have our annual Prism Review launch party, and that's our national literary journal that the students have been working on all year long. Gabby, come back. I'll send you a copy of Prism. It's been so long, right? Yeah. I know Mia's been working on it. I don't know who was in the class in the fall, but a few people certainly worked on. A ton of students. We've had like 30 students work on the journal this year, so they're going to be happy to share it and share their experiences working on it. So that'll be great. And we're also going to reveal the winner of this year's undergraduate creative writing prize there, who will be published in the journal, and that'll be a really excellent, fun announcement. And Gabby, also a former winner of the undergraduate creative writing prize. So, but that's it. Thank you all so much for coming to our last poetry reading of the spring semester. I really appreciate it. And yeah, join me once more in telling these 2 poets what a fantastic job they did. Gabby, Masa, you did great. And I know that Hannah and Emma, you guys did great. It's been a fantastic month. This is a great way to spend April, and I thank you all for taking part of it, and thank you all for joining us today.